Sarah, thanks so much for joining me on the Slice of Agriculture podcast. You were episode number 1. I'm so excited for this.
Woohoo!
How are you?
Me too. Doing great, man. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Who would have thought that episode 1 is in the same city?
I know in agriculture, nonetheless. So, I mean, this is pretty crazy and really, really exciting.
And people are like, why aren't you doing it in person? Next time. Next time we can do it in person. But really excited to have you here. So let's dive in. First off, if you could tell our audience just a little bit about the company and then maybe your background and how that led into it, and then we'll go into our discussion here today.
Yeah, great. Yeah, so I grew up on a farm in Wichita, Kansas, outside of Wichita, Kansas, which is a long ways from St. Pete, Florida. My dad was a fourth generation farmer, and he was the first generation that it was no longer profitable to do farming full time. So he had a full time job, but then he also farmed. And same with his four brothers, and so he really encouraged my brother and I to get away from farming, go to college. Was the first person in my family to graduate college, went on to law school, and then moved to Gainesville, Florida for my LLM in tax law, and spent 8 years like running a tax law firm, building that up, and then selling it. And so it's been a process getting to where I'm at and getting back into the agriculture space. But I started consulting for businesses after I sold my law firm, and dealing with the regulatory compliance environment, and it was like it was part of my heart, like getting back into what I love and my family and their history. And then 2020 happened, and everything kind of shut down. And my husband, who has 30 years of experience in the meat business and building companies, he's like, oh, it'd be so amazing if we could build this app that could show consumers at the point of purchase, where it came from, the high attributes in this item, and, basically steer them towards better food. So I'm like, oh yeah, I'll build a prototype for this. And I did, and we got a little investment coming in, and we had a couple brands that signed up for us. But the issue that we ran into was that the data was not there. If we wanted to show where it came from, most of the brands didn't know where it came from. They're like, we don't know. It might have came from a number of farms. It's probably in this geographical location, but we don't know. And then you start digging into what are the practices? How was it produced? That's a bigger question, like they definitely did not know that, and they didn't want to, get involved with that just because they're in the business of selling products that are produced cheap, most of them. So, and I'm kept thinking there has to be a better way. That was kind of the birth of AgWise. I've been a Bitcoin enthusiast for a while, and blockchain, big advocate. So in 2022, we went down this route of blockchain pilot. We had the largest organic ranch in the country as our pilot. And I'm like, okay, this should be easy because it should be somewhat standardized across the supply chain because it's organic. We got into it, and it was not standardized at all. Like we were going into processing plants with spiral notebooks, and I'm like, okay, hang on a second. We need to get people digitized before we could even talk about traceability. Because if the producers aren't digitized, they can't, like pull that data through the supply chain and get, compensated for those better practices that they're doing. So as we're trying to execute this pilot, we started building out a data management platform. I mean, at that point, is solely to execute this pilot. And while we're building this out, we got approached by a regenerative certification company that is working more on the land side of it. And they were unhappy with the platform they were using. And they're like, hey, can you build this out? You said you're doing this. And I'm like, well, I mean, what we're doing right now is very, very regimented, but it's not what you'd want. But yeah, we could build that. And so they've been very instrumental in helping us understand what is the need from the farmers. How can we make a difference? How can we do something better than what's out there to really help the farmers? So that's kind of like in a long story short, it was not a direct path to get to where we're at right now.
I love it. I love it. I love the personal stories that kind of tie into it. I mean, where you're from, how you grew up, obviously played a big factor in it. Um, Now, what I would love to kind of dig deeper in to like a big thing for me is like ROI, right? And I'm sure a lot of
Yep.
the farmers that you work with. So can you walk us through maybe a tangible example of how some of these precision tools you're creating have improved a farmer's ROI and maybe a success story?
Yeah, so our first so we built the platform and then we've been building these tools on top of the platform since then. And we just released Foliar scripts over the summer, and it was like a little late in the growing season, so we didn't get as much traction as we want. But we had three nationwide labs that signed up with us, and we were saving like farmers like $200 an acre, which is insane, insane. And what we're doing there is we're taking the plant tissue sample that they're doing with the lab, and then we're giving precision recommendations based on each nutrient that they need to apply on the field. So they're not over applying, they're not contributing to like runoff, they're not, using it as an insurance policy, and they're saving money. So it's kind of a win-win across the board.
Now, when we look ahead into the future of agriculture, let's say 10 years from now, what is the role that you see your tools and AI playing in transforming this industry?
I mean, I think there's so much opportunity with AI, you know, because the data's there. The problem with the data is in the agriculture space, this is all like siloed. Nobody wants to play together. Nobody wants to like pull the data through. So if you have data coming in from this software platform over here, it a lot of times can't pull over into another. And therefore, the farmers don't have access to real time actionable insights on what they need to do right here, right now. And so we're building solutions basically to get the data out. I mean, we'll play with anybody. We're not trying to be like, oh, you only play with us or you can't do this. We'll play with you. Like, we're just trying to figure out ways to extract data and then pull it in for, actionable insights at the end of the day, like to save the farmer money and help him understand where he's at with his ROI.
You're in an interesting situation because when you look at, you have a couple things to balance here. So, how do you balance the dual goals of driving farmer profitability, but also reducing environmental impacts? Like, are there trade offs, like one way or the other? How do you try to
Oh,
align these?
actually, it goes hand in hand because, those precision recommendations actually reduce the environmental impacts because farmers for so long, and I've seen it like growing up, like farmers use fertilizer nutrients as like an insurance policy. They kind of think they know what they need, but they don't know like that this is what they did. I know for my dad, hopefully my dad's not listening to this, he's probably doing the same application of nutrients that his grandpa did, and then his dad did, because that's all he knows. And okay, so that's what's done. And that's how we end up in the situation in St. Pete, Florida with, red tide and dead fish in our canals because it's the insurance policy of over application of nutrients.
Now, I know you've like anyone that's running a company, they have their ups and their downs. There's never not going to be the downs, right? So
Yep.
obviously you have some big challenges that you're tackling here, and with that, um, I'm sure those bring their own challenges. So like, what are some of the challenges you've faced in delivering these actionable insights at speed and scale?
The biggest challenge that we face is to help farmers get digitized. That literally that's the biggest challenge. Obviously, there's great integrations with you have John Deere out there, you have all that, but like before we could even get there with crop producers, we need to map out their fields. And there's a great solution. The USDA, anybody that has crop insurance, they have access to their like mapped out fields. Most of them just have like a paper copy of it. Well, there's farmers.gov that has like a digitized copy, but that's been a huge hurdle for farmers just to sign up for an online platform. So, I mean, we're dealing with an older generation, which, we're trying to help him and support him to get him over that hump because end of the day, like, they need to transition to get to that profitability level.
Literally, my next question for you, Sarah, was around how do you get them to adopt new technologies? So this ties in really well, but more of how do you position your tools as an investment versus an expense?
Yeah, and I mean, the numbers speak for itself. Like, over the summer with lawyer scripts, the numbers spoke for themselves. Like, if you're saving farmers money, like they're going to do it in a heartbeat. But you have to make it easy. You have to make it accessible, and they won't like question it. So that's really what we're trying to accomplish right now is make that easy, make it accessible, give them access without like giving them a headache that they're going to have to spend like 8 hours trying to figure out how to like log into farmers.gov.
Now, in your experience, when it comes to something like sustainability, how do farmers typically react to that?
Well, so farmers like typically don't react very well, but unless there's a paycheck attached to it. And so we've been working on 45Z carbon intensity for a while with the new administration change. And this is me from a tax attorney. Like one, the final rules are not out for something that's going into place in 2 days, 3 days, like 3, 4 days now. Like January 1st. We don't know how to track like the carbon intensity like for feedstock for 45Z because the final rules are not out. Kind of crazy.
Wow.
So, and my guess is like best case scenario, they'll have stuff out by mid-March, late March, maybe April, don't know. And this is a tax law that's like in effect for like a couple years, literally. The new administration's already said that they want to get rid of some of the stuff and like so, but farmers were all on board because they were going to get credit for basically each CI point reduction for their corn feedstock that was going to an ethanol like processing plant. Problem was there wasn't any clear guidance on how that is going to be measured. And I mean, yeah, the GREET model maybe, but they came out with like some kind of stupid regulation temporary stuff for another sister provision last year that is just like check the box on things. So a lot of uncertainty, but all I could say is like farmers were willing to sign up for that because there's money attached to those like practices that they were doing. They thought, but we're still like in an uncertainty zone.
So there's still a possibility though that exists, but maybe there's probably going to be more tracking measures added to it if it does exist.
Maybe, I mean, based on what they've put out, like there will be tracking measures without a doubt. There has to be.
Yeah.
And when I was building out the original model for this, it's like, okay, you need to approach this like an IRS audit because essentially you're dealing with the tax code. So that if you're not tracking it correctly, you're going to get audited. And then on top of it, 45C allows for transferability of tax credits. So, this ethanol plant could sell the tax credits to Walmart. Walmart gets audited or whatever, like you have to have like your books in a row for that. But it's just kind of crazy that we're now dealing with something that's going to law like in a couple of days and nobody knows like really what the final rules are. But all I could say is farmers were signing up for this like without knowing what was going on. They were willing to make changes based on that to like reduce their carbon intensity. So that's promising in my mind.
Yeah. I want to go back to something you and I talked about a little earlier in the conversation. We briefly kind of touched upon it with AI. I have to say it now. Like, if you don't talk about AI for a couple of minutes and it's like, what are you doing now? But how do you explain its? This kind of goes to the wary of new technology phrase that we said earlier. But how do you explain its value to farmers who might feel intimidated by the technology?
I mean, I don't think you get into the weeds on the technology. I think you get into like the benefit of all of this because end of the day, AI is only as good as the data feeding into it. And so in order for us to like have, good recommendations based on the AI, we need that data to be shared. And we're not going to force anybody to share data with us, but we need to have farmers understand that if they do share data, this is the benefit. And just all of the personal information is like scrubbed. So, we're not using any personal information. We're, bullying it down to, a very small geographical area tied to their location to help us give them the most accurate, recommendations.
I love it. One more question for you before we kind of wrap up here, and I'd love to continue the conversation in future episodes and content
Absolutely.
together. Let's talk about the farmer of the future. If you could paint a picture of what the farmer of the future looks like, what tools and opportunities do you think they'll have that they don't have today?
I mean, it's all about the adoption of technology for in my mind. You need to be able to see like what you're doing right now, what the impacts are, what your input costs are, and then what you're wanting to see. What is your return on investment? What is your yield goal? And then be able to make adjustments and decisions throughout the growing season based on, what your goal is at the beginning of the season, and have that completely interactive and, real time, and that I think is going to be the driving factor if you could accomplish that. So that's really what we're going towards right now.
I love it. Sarah, I want to thank you so much for joining us for episode 1 of the podcast. I can't
Woohoo!
wait to continue the conversation in the near future, but best of luck with everything, and thanks for joining us.
Thanks.